Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. Now, in this episode, we delve into a topic that's as controversial as pineapple on pizza, namely Georgia's foreign agent law. Yes, the country known for its stunning landscapes, ancient history, and wine that could make a sommelier weep, is now grappling with a law that's making the international community equally teary-eyed. Let's set the stage. Imagine Georgia, a small country in the Caucasus, trying to navigate its way through a geopolitical minefield. Now, on one side, you have Russia, a neighbor that's about as friendly as a hungry bear. On the other hand, you have the European Union, waving the carrot of membership like a tantalizing treat. Stuck in the middle is Georgia itself, trying to keep its balance without stepping on any explosive international toes. So, without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more about this story.
The Georgian parliament has overridden the presidential veto to adopt the contentious foreign agent law, sparking widespread international concern. In response, the US announced it was considering imposing sanctions on certain entities within Georgian government circles, a move played down by the Georgian Prime Minister.
For us, any talk about sanctions is not serious. Taking such type of measures would be counterproductive for the very entity that might be thinking of such a thing.
Georgia's president vetoed the bill, but was overruled by the country's parliament. Now she calls on Georgian people to choose a different government in the upcoming October elections.
Do we want a European future or Russian slavery? 84 men cannot decide this. We can. We. All together.
Critics argue that the law could harm Georgia's aspirations to join the European Union, which has already granted the country's candidate status. The European Union has since warned that the bill would jeopardize Georgia's further progress within the bloc.
Georgians are very fearful that this law will accelerate the process of Georgia returning into the Russian orbit and will stop Georgia's progress that we have seen throughout the past couple of years.
The law obliges any non-governmental organization or media outlet receiving more than 20% of its funding from abroad to register as acting in interest of a foreign power. This has raised alarms about potential threats to civil liberties and the suppression of dissent, leading to massive protests in the country.
Now, as always, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Oh yes, the foreign agent law, the latest legislative grenade to be lobbed into political life in Georgia. Passed by the ruling Georgian Dream party, this law requires any organization receiving over 20% of its funding from abroad to register as a foreign agent. Now, critics are calling it a page ripped straight out of Russia's playbook, where a similar law has been used to muzzle dissent and whip independent voices into submission. But let's rewind a bit. President Salome Zurabishvili vetoed the law, seeing it as a roadblock to Georgia's EU aspirations. But in a plot twist worthy of a daytime soap opera, the parliament overrode her veto. And they did so with an 84-4 vote, which is about as subtle as a sledgehammer in a glass factory. So the question remains, what happens now? Firstly, the law will be submitted to President Zurabishvili for signature, and she has 5 days to put pen to paper. But she's already made it clear she won't sign it. If she doesn't, the Speaker of Parliament, Shalva Papuashvili, will step in to get the job done. Once this legislative hot potato is officially passed, the real fun begins. The Justice Ministry, along with the National Agency of Public Registry, has 60 days to create a register for these so-called foreign agents. Organizations will then have a month to apply, detailing their funding sources, expenses, and basically everything short of their favorite pizza topping. Perhaps if they say it's pineapple, they might be getting an additional penalty. Who knows? Now, this law has sparked outrage. Protests erupted in Tbilisi, with people calling it the Russian law, an ominous nickname that hints at darker times. Non-compliance isn't an option unless you enjoy hefty fines. Fail to register, that's $9,000. Fail to submit your financial details, that's another $3,500. Keep messing up, the fines keep rolling in like an endless bureaucratic avalanche. And it doesn't stop there. The law allows the Justice Ministry to dig deep into personal information, from political views to health details, making it less about transparency and more about an invasive reality show where nobody volunteered to participate. The European Union has warned that this could derail Georgia's EU membership path. Washington isn't pleased either, with visa bans and a review of bilateral relations now on the table. So what's really at stake here is Georgia's future. Is it destined to follow Russia's authoritarian footsteps, or can it stay on the path towards democratic Europe? The foreign agent law is more than just a piece of legislation. It is a litmus test for Georgia's commitment to democracy, freedom, and its place in the world. And now, here to shed more light on the issue at hand is our guest today, Victor Kipiani, chairman of GeoCase. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
So, the so-called Foreign Agents Bill has now become law. It has been accepted by Parliament, much to the chagrin of the opposition, who didn't vote, by the way. So there is the formality of the presidential assent, which will not be given, but then the law is likely to enter into force anyway, because the veto has been overruled. So what is next for the citizens of Georgia and for the Georgian government?
Yes, that's the absolutely correct summary from your side. If the president of Georgia still refuses to sign, even after her veto has been rejected, then the chair of the parliament is entitled to sign the bill and put it into the force. So that's the sort of, mechanics or dynamics for the Georgian legislation to come into effect, and that will be the case with this piece of legislation as well. Now, the question, what follows next? Actually, what follows next has already started in Georgia, which is reflected and is reflecting on a regular and continuing basis in a very wide public protest and severe backlash by our international partners. And those two pressure points, they go hand in hand, to put this in a way.
Are they going to be effective? So far, the protests themselves have not stopped the government from proceeding with this piece of legislation. Do you think that foreign sanctions can actually do the trick?
Yes, that what I was about to say, that two pressure points, which I'm always are emphasizing, the domestic pressure point, which is by the Georgian society itself. Indeed, regardless of wide-scale protests in Tbilisi and different other cities of Georgia, and unabated protests, I have to say, the Georgian Dream has still been pressing on with its agenda, has accomplished it, at this stage at least. But another pressure point is by international partners. And those international partners are two key major players for Georgia and in Georgia. This is the European Union and the United States. Actually, before the bill being vetoed, and then the veto was rejected by the Parliament, the Department of State has already made a statement that accepting the law or enacting the law could entail some visa-related restrictions. And we have to see how that announcement would crystallize. Obviously, that decision would be in more specifics in relation to a range of Georgian decision makers, but still the names are not clear yet, and we have to see what would be the shape of that announcement. Another pillar of source of criticism is the European Union. The European Union, which has its own dynamics and bureaucracy, which is acting much more slowly for obvious reasons. But still, we already have some signs on the horizon that European Union would be stepping in with its own repercussions. However, there is more ambiguity on EU side, what those repercussions, what those consequences could be, rather than on the side of the United States.
So apart from visa restrictions, because this is like the first step, is it likely that other sanctions could follow? For example, ones pertaining to the assets of certain individuals connected to the current government. Would you say that this might actually make them think twice about what they are doing right now?
In fact, as I've already mentioned, the United States is in position, and that been formally mentioned and declared, that for the forthcoming restrictions would be in relation to the traveling to the United States. There is nothing else which was mentioned on top of that, although from some sources at the US Congress, there have been some discussions or sort of, preliminary tentative initiatives that those potential sanctions should expand and also include the sanctions of financial nature. But still, it's a bit premature to speak in more details what those sanctions could be. As for European Union, it's also important to note, and it's my personal opinion, which I have to express in the course of this interview. There have been some mentions by various member nations and stakeholders at the level of EU institutions that the visa-free regime, which Georgian nationals are enjoying with the European Union, could be revisited. In fact, could be postponed. I think that would be an extremely wrong decision, taking into account how much anti-Western propaganda, I won't be saying, blossoming in Georgia, but it became quite vivid and quite widespread. So I would appeal to EU politicians to be very selective when discussing a scope and nature of sanctions, and not to backfire or not to play into the hands of anti-European propaganda. Of course, it's one side of the coin when there could be sanctions vis-a-vis specific stakeholders or decision makers. But I think that in the context of that backlash, which could be a legitimate backlash and quite understandable, we should not fall as a victims of emotional decisions, and we should still, however, manage to sustain and to keep those community-to-community links, or people-to-people links, or individual-to-individual links, because we have to recall the various other examples. For instance, with the same Belarusia, when cutting off all the ties with Belarusia, as unwillingly played into the narrative of Lukashenko. So the same should not happen in Georgia, and that's something very specifically, very delicately, which has to be emphasized from my side.
Well, that's a good point. Also, you don't really want to target a society which is mostly pro-European. You want to target the anti-European government, right?
Exactly.
It is slightly different with, say, Russia, where most people seem to support Putin anyway. So we've actually imposed sanctions on Russia. We're also trying to disincentivize this support among the general population. Now, this doesn't really work with Georgia, where most people seem to be opposed to what's going on. Speaking of which, the foreign agent law itself, now, according to a recent report by Radio Free Europe, this is not just about registering. Apparently, the government may require people connected to these organizations to provide some very sensitive personal information. Would you say that this is yet another sign that this is not just about transparency? This is a law that could be used to essentially introduce another crackdown against dissenting voices, this time one that goes much deeper than before.
Absolutely. Just again, to subscribe myself to what you've just said, continuing my message that the only reliable ally of the European Union is the Georgian society. And that is very critical for Europeans and European politicians to remember when discussing the situation on the ground and undertaking certain measures. This is just again to underline. Now, to your question about ups and downs, or rather downs of the law. Actually, the law itself, in terms of legalese, is very straightforward. but more obscure it is, and more vague it is, more perilous it could become in terms of the consequences and range of consequences. It's about stifling dissenting voices to start with. And if we take into account that the target audience of that law is Georgian media, the broadcasters, printed or internet media, and civic society, the pillars of Georgian resilient democracy, to put this in a way. Of course, the downs of that law, or the grave consequences which potentially that law would entail and will entail, become quite clear. And also, if you take into account how weak the institutional capacity building and the institutions are in Georgia, just imagining for a second that the authorities are implementing quite vague provisos on various instances, quite vague, obscure, broad, discretionary provisos of that law. What the institutions are, the Georgian judiciary in the first place, or some others, which could control or rein in any potential abuse of the power under that law. So, of course, that has to be taken into consideration. And ending the last but not the least point, the final note or proviso, which has as if slipped into the draft law at the very last moment, when in the course of exercising the control by the Ministry of Justice, that's actually the Georgian the agency which will be in charge of monitoring an exercise of that law, could have an access and will be entitled to get an access to the personal data privacy information. And of course, in its entirety, that makes that law even more perilous and puts Georgia on a very slippery path in terms of its own democracy and the state of the governance inside, as well as external ties and external communications.
So, of course, it is quite ironic that Georgia recently celebrated Independence Day. So one very quick question. Do you think that this is the last time that true freedom in Georgian society could have been celebrated openly? Do you think that really there are dark times ahead?
Luckily enough, the backbone of resistance is strong enough and robust enough. And as we have seen over the last days, that vigor and robustness, I think it would be quite premature to jump to such a sort of dark conclusions, to put this in a way. On another side, however, the final points to emphasize that at this juncture of time, this bill, this law, is not the central element or ingredient of the picture, but various other statements, rhetorics, and that anti-propaganda, which is picking up in the country, makes us to believe that the dynamics that shifts are not about the so-called transparency, but something else, something which entails broader implications and wide implications. And that could be about geopolitical positioning Georgia, and it's about foreign objectives. So at this point of time, when we speak about the second try of reintroducing this specific piece of legislation, which so far turned out to be successful, implications and consequences could be, as I've said, much broader. I won't be saying that this law signals, type of the Georgian Zeitenwende in its foreign policy. However, the indications are clear. The indications are very troubling and quite worrisome.
So overall, it remains to be seen how society is going to react on it now, but it could be a very difficult time for our freedom-loving Georgians who are opposing this particular piece of legislation. Victor Kipiani was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you so much.
And now it's time for Eastern News Flash, a curated selection of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. The controversial foreign agent bill has been withdrawn from the parliamentary agenda in Republika Srpska. The bill, which mirrors similar legislation in Russia, was retracted for further alignment with European Union laws.
After the withdrawal of the legislation, the president of Bosnia-Herzegovina's Serb-led entity Milorad Dodik clarified that the decision was made to address visible objections related to European norms. Bosnia, having attained EU candidate status in 2022, has been under scrutiny to ensure compliance with the bloc's membership criteria. Dodik's separatist rhetoric and actions have been a significant obstacle in Bosnia's journey towards EU integration. His recent proposal to disassociate Republika Srpska from the Bosnian state was met with international criticism, particularly from the United States, which has sanctioned Dodik for his efforts to destabilize the Dayton peace accords. The Foreign Agent Bill, if passed, would have required organizations receiving foreign funding to register and report their activities, potentially subjecting them to stringent government oversight. While the bill proponents have cited the need for transparency, opponents view it as a tool for exerting control over civil society and suppressing freedom of expression, measures used in Russia to stifle dissent and control civil society.
A Chinese-Singaporean consortium has been named the winner of the contract to build the long-awaited Anaklia deepwater port on Georgia's Black Sea coast. This decision marks the culmination of a complex political and economic journey.
The Georgian government, holding a 51% stake in the venture, has expressed confidence that the port will serve as a crucial node in the Middle Corridor trade route, offering an alternative path between China and Europe that bypasses Russia. The construction is set to commence in June, with the port expecting to significantly boost Georgia's role in global trade dynamics. The announcement ends years of speculation and controversy surrounding the project. The previous attempt led by the Antalya Development Consortium suffered setbacks, including legal challenges and the withdrawal of American investors, which ultimately led to the cancellation of the original contract. The Antalya port is expected to create numerous job opportunities and foster economic growth, positioning Georgia as an important player in Eurasian trade.
A former bodyguard to Russian President Vladimir Putin, Alexei Diomin, has been appointed Secretary of the State Council. This appointment marks Diomin's rise to a prominent position in the Russian political landscape and is seen as a sign of his growing influence.
Diomin, who has previously served as the governor of the Tula region, is known for his close ties with the defense industries. His new role as Secretary of the State Council, which is an advisory board that includes governors, top parliament deputies and the Prime Minister, places him in the highly visible and strategic position. The Kremlin has highlighted his extensive resume, which includes serving as a deputy defense minister and playing a pivotal role in the 2014 operation to annex Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula. The United States Treasury Department sanctioned Diomin in 2018 for his involvement in the Crimean annexation. The appointment comes amid a reshuffle of top defense-related positions, signaling a possible crackdown on corruption within the sector. Diomin's oversight of Russia's military-industrial complex as a Kremlin aide is expected to balance powerful business interests and state defense conglomerate Rostech.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.